I think a lot of places need to do some work about like understanding what this dynamic looks like when the parents aren't on the same page.
Right.
Because I think like CHIO, for example, their gender diversity clinic, like they're more used to having the situation where both parents are supporting
Right.
or neither parent, and then the youth is just coming on their own, but they don't have a lot of experience with the situation that we have where like one parent is supporting and the other parent is not. So like the child is essentially like living two different, like completely different lives with different names, different clothes, different like
Right.
I don't think that people really have the analysis for that, because it's really easy. Like we are involved with Children's Aid as well,
Yeah.
and have been for a long time, not just because of this, but because of other issues at Dad's house. But it's very tempting for people to just say like, this is a conflict between the parents.
Right.
And that's what keeps kind of happening. It's like at CHIO, they say, well, it's a conflict between the parents. We can't really say who's right. Like even though that CHIO, they'll say like, well, yeah, the child is old enough to define their own gender, and yeah, this, you know, supporting the child is the right path. But then they still kind of come back to, well, the real problem here is the conflict between the parents. And this is the same thing with Children's Aid. It's like they see what's going on and they say, well, the kids are at risk of harm, emotional harm, but the emotional harm is because is the conflict between the parents. And it's like, my child's gender is not a conflict, and abuse and violence is not a conflict, like, because it completely erases that there's like a power dynamic, and that like people don't become trans because their parents divorce.
Right.
And they don't become trans because like, you know, their parent is mentally ill. Like there's no like science that this kind of thing is being based on. Like there's no research, it's just somebody can say something and then it gets believed, but it doesn't actually make a lot of sense.
No.
Like also, why would you even do that? And I think saying, well, this is just a conflict is another way of also like removing yourself from taking responsibility and saying like, this is wrong, like this child has rights like aside from the parents, and they should be allowed to be themselves, and if there's a space where they're not safe, then they shouldn't be there. Or the organization like Children's Aid, for example, should be helping the other parent like get to a place of accepting the child, but also protecting the child in the meantime, rather than just saying, well, we don't really know who's right, and like, oh, these people have such different views, and like, well, we don't really know what to do, let the court sort it out. But I mean, the court process been over 3 years. So, and then Children's Aid, they say, well, we don't have the power to do anything. I'm like, you don't have the power? You're like, you're Children's Aid, you have all the power.
Yeah.
You're choosing not to use it.
Right.
And I think that like I've done some research, and I've contacted someone in Toronto at the Children's Aid Society there, because they have Out and Proud like division for queer and trans families, and I think it's pretty bad that we don't have that in Ottawa, because we do have like some other services, and I think it says like somewhere in the Child and Family Services Act that you have a right to have culturally like appropriate care when you access Children's Aid. And I think it's fairly easy to argue that like being trans or being queer like can be considered like a culture, and I don't think it's okay for workers that don't like either identify as part of that community or have done some extra special training to be like saying, like I've sat in meetings like the case conference at the school where there's like 12 cisgender people like talking about what's best for my trans child, and I'm like, this is not like, this is really oppressive. Like you have no idea, like you don't know what this kid is going to be going through. Like it's not to talk about like, well, how hard it is for the school to make the accommodations, like that's also really oppressive. Like it's like, suck it up. You just have to like put a different sign on the bathroom and like call her by a different name. Like it's actually not that much work. And I think that's another way where people like kind of don't help marginalized groups. It's like, oh, it's too much work, it's too expensive, it's so hard on me to do this. But like that's also really shitty. And it's just like, it's not, people don't really want to reflect on the privilege that they have being cisgender, and just, it's like, just basically like be a good person. Like don't be an asshole. Like, I mean, I've literally gone and like spoken to doctors, I mean, about sexual violence, and said to people like this isn't really that difficult. It's like literally just listen to people, believe what they're saying, validate them, and don't be an asshole. Like, and then you're gonna actually help people. Like you don't need a university degree. You don't need to be a social worker or a psychologist or like a doctor or a gender specialist to like be an ally to trans people. Like you just need to be a decent human being that's willing to like listen and learn, and like that's sometimes what I don't see happening in organizations like even at CHIO, even though it's a gender diversity clinic, like the doctor and the people that work there are all cisgender. So okay, well maybe they're experts and they're advocating, that's great, but do they really like understand what those kids are going through? I'm not really sure.
They don't have a lived